Hi, I'm Laura, an Aquamarine 18. Welcome to my channel. I'm here to provide a response to a new tarot tag, and this one is called Shopping for Tarot, and it is a tag that's started by LadyKnight of Avalon, whose channel is completely new to me. I'll link the video that originated this tag below. I found this tag because a few folks that are in my subscription list have provided responses already. I've watched some of them, not quite all. So I liked the questions and I thought that I would jump in with some answers. And I watched LadyKnight of Avalon's original video today. And she was kind of contextualizing this in the context of people often getting questions, particularly folks with quite large deck collections, getting questions like, well, how can you want all of those decks? Why do you buy all those decks? You don't need all of those decks. And so on and so on. So kind of wanting to have a tag where we would talk about why we buy the decks that we do, and kind of celebrating having tarot collections in that way. It's early morning for me, so I'm still caffeinating. So the tag has 10 questions, and I'm just going to go through them without further ado. So the first question is, what is the last deck you bought and why that one? So the last deck that I spent money on is not here right now because it's a Kickstarter, so I'm waiting on it. The last deck that I purchased is actually not a tarot deck. It's the Green Glyphs Lenormand by James R. Eads, which was just on Kickstarter. And I purchased that one. Actually, I don't know how to read Lenormand at all. But every year I kind of set a goal in terms of learning something new, a new skill or a new area or topic or something like that, that is kind of very, very broadly related to kind of divination, spiritual practice, so on and so on. I mean, I'm always learning, but I like to have, a yearly kind of New Year's resolution, if you will. And my 2020 resolution is going to be that I would like to learn Lenormand. So I do have one Lenormand deck already. It is it's Kelly from the Truth and Stories Story in Color Lenormand, and it's beautiful, and I love it for a whole host of reasons. It is not exactly a traditional Lenormand, though, in terms of its kind of aesthetic style. So I thought I really like James R. Eads' art style. I have a couple of his tarot decks. And I've supported him on Kickstarter before. And when I saw the Green Glyphs Lenormand get launched, I thought, well, this would be a really good deck to use in my learning Lenormand, in terms of it being a fairly traditional deck. There are some kind of extra cards that you can make switches with and things like this. But it's like I would say it's a fairly traditional Lenormand deck, at least from what I know of Lenormand. So I bought it for that reason, and I'm going to make videos about my learning Lenormand process. So early 2020, I'll probably make one first about kind of what the resources I'm using are going to be. But I'm really excited to work with the Green Glyphs to learn Lenormand. Yeah. Question number 2. What is your decision process when you buy a new deck? I guess this depends. I probably like a lot of people, I buy most of my decks online at this point. The town in which I live, there isn't really a tarot store or anything like that. There are a few chain, big bookstores that have kind of esoteric sections that have mass market decks. But I do buy a lot of my decks online. In the store, it's a little bit different because in the store I might be a little bit more spontaneous. Like if I see something and there's a deck out that I can play with and see, and I just fall in love, that happens. But usually it's online. So I look and see, do I like the artwork? is a good place to start. Lots of decks that are really popular, the art style just doesn't speak to me at all. And if the art style is not one that I, feel drawn to, I'm probably not going to use the deck. So that's kind of a first consideration. I absolutely think about cost, with indie decks in particular, which means for me usually, because I'm in Canada, often that means thinking about things like exchange rates, shipping, and the potential for getting a customs charge, like if it goes through the border and customs get added. I've had a few times that happen. It doesn't happen every time. And the exchange rate for American dollars right now for me is not very good. So that's definitely a consideration. Like some independent decks are just out of the budget. So if, even if I really like it, if a deck is going to be way over $100, like it would have to be a very, very particular circumstance. Like I've never spent that much so far. I might do a bit of research about the creator. This hasn't come up too many times. It definitely has a couple though, where I don't know, I have big red flags about the creator's politics or something, then I'm not going to give them my money. So I think it was Katie who mentioned that in her response to this tag too. It's like same thing. Like if I find, I don't know, a deck creator making some kind of like racist comments or something like that, nope. And similarly, if I find a deck that I feel like the representation is problematic, that's not going to be a deck that I'm probably going to go for. There's certain aesthetic styles of decks that I generally just don't go for. Most photo collage decks, for example, aren't really my thing. So some of the decision-making process is just, is this a deck that even appeals to me? And if it is, then I look at things like, well, how much does this cost? I also consider how a new deck purchase will fit into my current collection. So if maybe I would like to work with it with a particular Oracle deck that I have, or maybe a deck is really calling out to me, but it's also really similar to a deck that I already have, then I might not purchase it. I don't need to necessarily see every card before I purchase a deck, though sometimes, depending on the deck, I might like to, but it's not an absolute necessity. And in terms of thinking about seeing every card in a deck, that is a good segue to question number 3, which is, what are deal breakers in a deck that keep you from buying it? So I've already mentioned things like shitty deck creator politics and exorbitant costs. Those can both absolutely be deal breakers. In terms of like a deck itself, too many eyes. I think I've talked about this before. I have a very visceral, abject reaction to too many eyes, and there's quite a few decks that fall into the too many eyes category. The one that immediately comes to mind is the Wooden Tarot. And I think the art style is beautiful. I have the Earthbound Oracle. I love it dearly, but there are too many eyes. And I can't, it's not that I don't think the art is beautiful. It's just, it is really, and I don't know why. It's a really visceral negative reaction that I don't think, I think it would be a total barrier to me working with the deck. I don't think I would use it. And it's not the kind of visceral negative reaction. I can accept that maybe some negative reactions to things, for sure you want to think, well, why do I have a negative reaction to this? Is this something that I need to work on? Is this something that I need to, that's absolutely valid. But this is not one of those things for me. So too many eyes is a deal breaker. Also another one, and this is one that is quite common in decks, but if it's too pervasive is a real deal breaker for me for the same reason as too many eyes. And that is things where a human figure's head should be. So there's one, I think it's the Naked Heart Tarot, has a tree growing out of a human torso, out of here. And it's, again, it's not because the art is not beautiful. It's not, it's all, it's it's not me, it's not you, it's me. This is definitely me. It's just certain things that really, for whatever reason, trigger a really abjecting reaction. So those are mostly deal breakers. Another thing that I would say is a deal breaker in most cases, not every time, but in most cases, if a deck is too themed, it's probably going to... I don't go for a theme. In Oracle decks, maybe a little bit more, insofar as animal deck is a theme. But For really, really, really themed deck, it's usually not my thing. There are absolute exceptions, but most of the time not. Okay. Number 4, little white book or big guidebook. It is not the size of the book that matters, it's the contents. I want a book of any size to do something interesting and to meet a need for me. I don't want a booklet of generic Rider-Waite-Smith based keywords. I'm never going to look at it. I understand why that might be useful for someone who's getting their first deck, but not for me. I want a book that speaks to a creator's intentions, speaks to the creative decisions they've made, offers something kind of novel and that relates directly to the imagery of the artwork. And whether that book is a huge book or a small book, I have both big and small guidebooks that I really like. I have the Deviant Moon, the huge hardcover Deviant Moon book is incredible. And I'm so glad that I have it. But I also have some smaller little guidebooks that fit inside the deck that are great and are really insightful. So I don't think it's the size of the guidebook. If I get a deck that's a tarot deck that is really fairly straightforwardly Rider-Waite-Smith inspired, I will very seldom use the guidebook unless it's something really kind of special like the Deviant Moon book. With a Marseille deck, I'm probably never going to use the guidebook either. With an Oracle deck, the guidebook really does matter to me. I want to be able to work with it for the most part. So it really depends. It's not about the size of the guidebook. It's not the size that matters. Okay, number 5. Do you have new deck rituals? How do you break in a new deck? I don't really have new deck rituals. When I get a new deck, I like to sit on the couch with my coffee or tea or wine or whatever I have and go through every card in the deck and just take time, only focusing on the deck and looking at each one. I also, if a deck is new and I'm using it for the first time, of course, give it a very extra shuffle. I used to be more ritual about new decks, getting out the incense and so on. Much less so now, if I'm honest. So nothing complicated, no. I do like to, as part of the new deck ritual, but I don't ever do it right away, but part of a new deck ritual for me is definitely coming up with if I want to make a bag for the deck. But I have some decks that I'm still making the bag and I've had the deck for like a year, so it's not really a new ritual per se. It's just something that I like to do. Number 6, have you ever been disappointed after getting a deck because it looked or felt different than expected? And have you ever been pleasantly surprised by a deck after getting it? Yes, on both counts. I would feel like an asshole saying that decks disappointed me. I've definitely been disappointed by things like cardstock, where it's like, oh, I really, this deck looks beautiful online, and then you get in the cardstock is like, no. And I know that this is entirely just a matter of opinion, but the really glossy, sticky, no. So I've been disappointed by things like that. Disappointed after getting a deck. One deck, I bought the independent version of Our Tarot by Sarah Shipman, I think is her name. And it's a deck of women from history, and every card has a woman from history on it, and it has a good guidebook describing each woman and what she was doing and accomplishments and things like this that gives an idea of why she would be picked as a representation for that particular card. And I'm not going to lie, I mostly bought that deck because there was an Octavia Butler card. And folks who know me know that I am a fan and a big feminist sci-fi fantasy reader. And I wouldn't say that the deck itself was disappointing in that it wasn't what I expected. I was disappointed in that I find it a very hard deck to work with. I like it aesthetically. I have no interest in it leaving my collection, but I was disappointed in that I thought that it would be a more intuitive reader than it is, and I think it's partly that I don't know all of the women in the deck, so some of the associations are really lost on me without the book. And I think some of it is the ones that I do know, I might have different associations than the creator. So there's like a bit of a dissonance there. So that kind of like experience was a disappointment, but not really the deck itself, I wouldn't say. Have you ever been pleasantly surprised by a deck? Absolutely. There are a few decks in my collection that I kind of went back and forth for a long time of whether or not I wanted, because I wasn't sure if I would get along with them, and then eventually got, and now love. The Deviant Moon is one of those. I was not sure if I would think it would be too themed or that I would only want to work with it at Halloween. Neither of those things are true. It's a great reader. The very odd time I read for my partner, it's the one that gets chosen. It's the death metal deck. And that's the one that's being referred to. So I love that. I mean, I can't say I'm surprised that I like it because I knew I liked the artwork, but I'm surprised how good of a reader that deck is. The Dreaming Way Tarot, I almost didn't get because I thought it might be too like light and gentle for me, and it's totally not. I really, really like that deck as well. So that was a pleasant surprise. Yeah, there's like quite a few decks that are not pleasant surprise per se, but that I love much more than I expected. So that's really nice. Number 7, do you interview new decks? This is I used to do it all the time and now I do it rarely. I feel like now, having a lot more experience with working with diverse types of decks and different decks, the interview is just not a thing that I feel the need to do. I usually get a feel pretty quickly of if a deck perhaps works better for certain kinds of questions than others for me. So the interview just feels kind of superfluous at this point. Not that I never do it, but not very often. Number 8, do you ever buy decks for a specific purpose, only using it for that purpose? I did get one deck out to show for this question when I just did a quick skim of the questions. I don't generally buy decks only for a specific purpose, but I do have one that definitely falls under that category, and that is the Arcana of Astrology by Claire Goodchild of Black and the Moon. She has a lot of decks, so she created the Antique Anatomy Tarot, which I have the indie version of the Ephemera edition, and there's a couple of Oracle decks that now I can't remember the names, and she has a new Oracle deck coming out that I pre-ordered, a Memento Mori Oracle as well. But this deck, Arcana of Astrology, it's 42 cards, and they're all kind of astrologically associated. So there's a card for each planet, for example, Sun, Earth, Mercury, and so on. There is a card for each sign, Aries, for example, that shows the constellation there. There are a handful of asteroids like Chiron, and I really bought this deck for the very specific purposes too. One of kind of having a nice visual when I was studying astrology, which I kind of started studying in a more diligent way and totally fell off of looking at, and I will return to someday, but I'm kind of studying it still, but less seriously, more casually. But also because I wanted to have these moon cards, moon phase cards, and I keep these out on my reading table all the time to display the moon phase. And if I'm doing a new moon reading, for example, I'll put the new moon card down on the table and do my spread around it, or the same thing for a full moon reading. So it's not a deck that I like shuffle and do readings with. I bought it very specifically with the intent of using it to kind of display or use as a kind of centerpiece for readings and not for anything else. So that's my one example. Number 9, do you differentiate between decks you buy for yourself and decks you would use for other people? I do not read for other people very often, so the prospect of reading for other people is not really ever a thing that's on my mind when I'm looking at a deck. I do have one deck that I feel very personally connected to that's also a very, very out of print deck that I would not read for other people at this point. Other than that one, if someone wanted a reading and pointed at basically any other deck in my collection, I wouldn't have an issue with it. I'm not protective about like people not being allowed to touch my decks or anything like that. So no, not really. And the last question, number 10. What is one thing you wish deck creators would do more of, or stop doing? Katie Flowers, in her response to this, gave a really good answer, which was mentioning the idea of almost multiple kind of versions of a deck at different price points. And I do have a few decks that that the creators have done that, and I think that that's really cool. So yeah, like another vote, for that idea, for sure. I wish deck creators would stop putting out culturally appropriative, problematically misrepresentative decks full of thin bodies and nothing else, like all this kind of representational issues. I really wish we could do better. And there's like a lot of people doing like really, really great and a lot of great decks in these respects, but there's a lot of ones that are not. And I wish that would change. I wish that there were less crappy cardstock decks. I've absolutely had decks that I've not bought because I didn't like the cardstock, and there are absolutely decks in my collection that if the cardstock was better, I would use way more. So I wish that was a thing that would change. And I will say that I feel like in the past couple of years, I've observed a trend that maybe others have noticed, and I'm not going to name any specifics, where publishers that are not established tarot publishers, but like book publishers, publishers of other things, are kind of getting into the business of publishing tarot decks and aren't making very good cardstock. So I wish that there was more thoughtfulness there, for sure. And obviously there's like a learning curve to all these things, but I really wish that the cardstock just across the board could be better. And I think that and I really don't think that this is a thing that requires a lot of money. I think that there are mass market, affordable deck publishers with consistently good cardstock, and like US Games comes to mind. I really like US Games cardstock. That show that you can have cardstock that holds up, that is not exorbitantly expensive. I think that it is possible. So I really wish cardstock, for sure. Yeah, I'm sure I could come up with lots of other things that I wish creators would do more of, or do or stop doing, but those are the things that come to mind. Yeah. So that's my shopping for tarot tag. That's some of the things I think about when I buy decks. A lot of them apply to Oracle decks too. Though maybe that's a different tag. I'm not sure. If there's a shopping for Oracle tag started, I'll respond to that one as well. I hope that this has been interesting, and if you stuck with me for 23 minutes, thank you. Feel free to leave your comments below about how you like to shop for tarot, or if you make a response to this tag, do let me know so that I can check out your answers too. Thanks again for watching, and have a great day. Bye.